Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today we are here to consider Senate Bill 3, a bill similar to House Bill 1948 of last session and a companion bill to House Bill 77. The bill has two major components and amends the Abortion Control Act of Pennsylvania of 1989, an Abortion Control Act law that has withstood the test of time and withstood a Supreme Court decision. The first component includes a ban on dismemberment abortions and bans abortions beyond 20 weeks gestation from the current 24 weeks gestation, or from 6 months to 5 months and 6 days. Mr. Speaker, I believe it is important to understand the underlying current law in regard to protecting life in Pennsylvania because it is still relevant as we consider Senate Bill 3. Mr. Speaker, in the law that stands today, the legislative intent from 1989 reads as follows. It is the intention of the General Assembly of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania to protect hereby the life and health of the woman subject to abortion and to protect the life and health of the child subject to abortion. It is the further intention of the General Assembly to foster the development of standards of professional conduct in a critical area of medical practice, to provide for development of statistical data, and to protect the right of the minor woman voluntarily to decide to submit to abortion or to carry her child to term. The General Assembly finds as fact that the rights and interests furthered by this chapter are not secure in the context in which abortion is presently performed. In conclusions, reliable and convincing evidence has compelled the General Assembly to conclude, and the General Assembly does hereby solemnly declare and find that many women now seek or are encouraged to undergo abortions without full knowledge of the development of the unborn child or of alternatives to abortion. The gestational age at which viability of an unborn child occurs has been lowering substantially and steadily as advances in neonatal medical care continue to be made. A significant number of late-term abortions result in live births or in delivery of children who could survive if measures were taken to bring about breathing. Some physicians have been allowing these children to die or have been failing to induce breathing. Because the Commonwealth places a supreme value upon protecting human life, it is necessary that those physicians which it permits to practice medicine be held to precise standards of care in cases where their actions do or may result in the death of an unborn child. A reasonable waiting period, as contained in this chapter, is critical to the assurance that a woman elect to undergo an abortion procedure only after having the fullest opportunity to give her informed consent thereto. The last section that I will read, in every relevant civil or criminal proceeding in which it is possible to do so without violating the federal Constitution, the common and statutory law of Pennsylvania shall be construed so as to extend to the unborn, the equal protection of the laws, and to further the public policy of this Commonwealth, encouraging childbirth over abortion. Mr. Speaker, opponents of the bill say that dismemberment is not a medical term. So be it, it's a term that everyone understands including those in the medical profession. In the Supreme Court case Stenberg versus Carhart, Supreme Court Justice Kennedy described dismemberment as the following. As described by Dr. Carhart, the D&E procedure requires the abortionist to use instruments to grasp a portion, such as a foot or hand, of a developed and living fetus and drag the grasped portion out of the uterus into the vagina. Dr. Carhart uses the traction created by the opening between the uterus and vagina to dismember the fetus, tearing the grasped portion away from the remainder of the body. The traction between the uterus and vagina is essential to the procedure because attempting to abort a fetus without using that traction is described by Dr. Carhart as pulling the cat's tail or dragging a string across the floor. You'll just keep dragging it. It's not until something grabs the other end that you are going to develop traction. The fetus in many cases dies just as a human adult or child would. It bleeds to death as it is torn limb from limb. The fetus can be alive at the beginning of the dismemberment process and can survive for a time while its limbs are being torn off. Dr. Carhart agreed that when you pull out a piece of the fetus, let's say an arm or a leg, and remove that, at the time just prior to removal of the portion of the fetus is alive. Dr. Carhart has observed fetal heartbeat via ultrasound with extensive parts of the fetus removed, and testified that mere dismemberment of a limb does not always cause death because he knows of a physician who removed the arm of a fetus only to have the fetus go on to be born as a living child with one arm. At the conclusion of a D&E abortion, no intact fetus remains. In Dr. Carhart's words, the abortionist is left with a tray full of pieces. Rolling back the time for allowable abortions to be performed to 20 weeks still keeps Pennsylvania and most of our nation in line with only a few countries, including North Korea and China. The majority of countries prohibit abortion after 12 weeks gestation. And again, the Abortion Control Act reflects the need to review the 24-week under the definition of viability in Section 3203. The definition of viability in current law reads, viability, that stage of a fetal development when, in the judgment of the physician based on the particular facts of this case before him, and in light of the most advanced medical technology and information available to him, there is a reasonable likelihood or sustained survival of the unborn child outside of the body of his or her mother with or without artificial support. Mr. Speaker, with the advancement in technology, we hear stories right here in Pennsylvania of fetal surgeries at our children's hospital in Philadelphia. Medical science guides the treatment of an unborn baby as a patient, capable of pain and entitled to the most sophisticated means of managing that pain. PBS aired a documentary, Born Twice, describing this dramatic fetal surgery right here in Pennsylvania. In Texas, Mr. Speaker, in 2016, an amazing routine ultrasound was performed at 16 weeks of an expectant mother. The doctors found a tumor that develops before birth on the baby's tailbone. It's the most common tumor seen in a newborn. Doctors advised her to terminate her pregnancy. However, Dr. Darrell Cass, co-director of Texas's Children's Fetal Center and professor of surgery, told her about another possibility: fetal surgery. She was 23 weeks and 5 days pregnant. Dr. Cass described the procedure as the baby hanging out in the air outside of the mother's womb as he removed the baby to remove the tumor and then placed the baby back in the mother's womb. After bed rest and 12 more weeks of pregnancy, the baby was delivered full term. The doctors removed the rest of the tumor at birth, and the baby is doing beautiful, according to CNN that covered this story. Members of the House and the people of Pennsylvania, this is the type of advancement in technology we see today. Opponents speak of forcing women to have abortions if they are told they are carrying a child with a disability. It is ironic that almost every session day, we recognize in this House a group of people with certain disabilities. Indeed, in Iceland, they brag about eliminating children with Down syndrome. This is a clear example of the philosophy of eugenics of Planned Parenthood, which, by the way, is under investigation right now by the FBI. People with disabilities have contributed much to our society. Although not born with a disability, who can dispute the contributions of a Stephen Hawking or a Beethoven, and numerous others today with disabilities contributing to our society, including our soldiers who suddenly find themselves with a disability. And today we see even the advancement through technology of the wonderful artificial limbs that allow our soldiers to continue living a productive life. Mr. Speaker, I myself have a sister who was born with a physical disability, who has taught children in Head Start. And when I'm out in the community with my sister, there are still parents and children who come up to her and recognize her as their loving and compassionate Head Start teacher. At one trip to the emergency room in Warren with my sister, the ER doctor looked at my sister and said, "You were my Head Start teacher." Yes, teachers touch the future, including teachers with disabilities. And what about that other great hospital in Pennsylvania, in Philadelphia, the Shriners Hospital? I must say, one of the most heartwarming commercials that I have ever seen. This little boy who uses a wheelchair sharing the loving, compassionate deeds of the Shriners. And oh, by the way, my sister spent months at that very same hospital that enabled her to live a productive life. And ladies and gentlemen, let's not forget people with disabilities like Gianna Jessen, who was born in the 30th week of pregnancy during a failed saline abortion. Her birth certificate is signed by the doctor performing the abortion. She was born with cerebral palsy after the botched abortion. She has testified at a congressional hearing investigation of Planned Parenthood. And now the U.S. House of Representatives has passed a 20-week limit on abortion, and the bill is now in the U.S. Senate. After 60 million abortions in this country since the Roe v. Wade decision in '73, It is time, Mr. Speaker, to look at the gruesomeness of this dismemberment practice and recognize the technologies that allow many babies born at 20, 21, 22 weeks to survive and thrive. I will once again conclude my remarks with the words of another extraordinary individual, William Wilberforce, who led the fight for more than 40 years to successfully outlaw England's barbaric participation in the human slave trade during the 18th century. The nature and all the circumstances of the trade are now laid open to us. We can no longer plead ignorance. We cannot evade it. We may spurn it. We may kick it out of the way, but we cannot turn aside as to avoid seeing it. For it is brought now so directly before our eyes that this House must decide and must justify to all the world and to its own conscience the grounds of the decision. Then he continues, let not Parliament be the only body that is insensible to the principles of natural justice. And Mr. Speaker, let not the PA House of Representatives be insensitive to the principles of the sanctity of life. Please vote for life today. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.